Hello everyone, this is Venus Brown from Diverse Spectrums. Today I'm going to be starting on the category of neurodiversity, with this post just dealing with what neurodiversity is, some examples, and some terms. And in future weeks we will do other areas of neurodiversity. Remember though, I am not a medical professional. I am only trying to provide information and hoping to expand knowledge and understanding. My past experience is from personal family experience and work as an educator, both in mainstream and exceptional needs classrooms. My degrees and certifications are in sociology and education, not in medicine. Feel the need to get help or identify a specific issue? There are medical care workers, advocates, and other specialized experts that may be able to help you with your specific needs. Neurodiversity can be very important in providing support and guidance for those on various diverse spectrums. Plus, on the personal side, neurodiversity has been a very important part of my family life, with several members on neurodivergent spectrums. Growing up, my brother, who has autism, was misdiagnosed and underestimated much of his young life, finally getting the autism diagnosis around 13 years old. We have a grandparent, uncle, multiple cousins that may also be on the autism spectrum, but grew up in a time that little was really known about that. Both of my kids are what some might call twice exceptional, which is gifted along with other exceptionalities, and my niece and nephews are also neurodivergent. And there's me. I never really thought I might be neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum at all. After a traumatic brain injury and late autism diagnosis of my kids, I started to look back and wonder. My traumatic brain injury certainly contributes to my neurodivergence, but even as a child, there were some things that might not be viewed as neurotypical. There will be some topics around neurodiversity that I plan on covering in the next couple months, starting next week with executive function. This week, I am digging into the broad topic of neurodiversity, neurodivergent individuals, and various terms concerning the neurological spectrum. There is a lot of information to cover, so I will try to touch on topics broadly in this post, and mostly addressed what neurodiversity is. Those topics I post later will cover more specific issues, address neurodiversity in school, the workplace, the healthcare system, other societal settings, and address different perspectives and types of neurodiversity. Start with a look at what neurodiversity actually is. In order to do that, let's think about a word that many of you have already heard, neurotypical. That tends to fit people who are considered to have brains that fall within society's average. So looking at the diagram here on verbal skills, working memory, visual skills, and processing speed, their brains would fall right around in the middle. Not above average, not below average. At the Exceptional Individuals website, they tell us that when these abilities and characteristics are not typical, it is referred to as neurodivergence. Those characteristics may be below or beyond what is considered typical. Therefore, people who are not neurotypical might identify as a neurodivergent person. I am neurodivergent, and you may or may not be. But it is always the individual's choice what words they use to self-identify, or even if they choose to identify at all. If you are unsure and want to address such identification to a person, you could try stating how you identify and then ask the person how they identify. I am neurodivergent, and you? You can use this method to ask about gender identity and other things as well. Either way, it's always the individual's choice if and how they identify and respond to you. It's not a matter of trying to create new confusing grammar and terms. It's a matter of finding where you fit, what you identify as. How you identify may not be how somebody else identifies. But there is nothing wrong with a person realizing that maybe they don't fit the typical, and that maybe they fit in some category that you're not used to, that you don't understand. And everyone is allowed to change their identity. People don't always stay exactly the same. Sometimes identities change. Sometimes who you feel you are on the inside changes. As we're going through life, our lives will change. And so it is okay for you and for others to change how they self-identify. And sometimes it's even for those people that do fit the norm to say, this is who I am and this is where I fit. This is how I identify. Now, the term for the broader group of people with huge varieties of diverse cognitive function is called neurodiverse. We are neurodiverse. That broad diversity of variable cognitive abilities and characteristics within many neurodiverse people is neurodiversity. I hope I'm not confusing anyone because each term is very similar yet has subtle distinctions. So again, when those abilities and characteristics are not typical, we call it neurodivergent. So a person who does not identify as neurotypical might identify as a neurodivergent person. They as an individual are neurodivergent. And the broader group of neurodivergent people are called neurodiverse. And those broad variable cognitive abilities are referred to as neurodiversity. As stated by DCEG staff, neurodiversity describes the variation in the human experience of the world, in school, at work, and through social relationships. Driven by both genetic and environmental factors, an estimated 15 to 20% of the world's population exhibits some form of neurodivergence. As you see, this is no small group of people. It doesn't refer just to people with ADHD or autism, but people that may have many different types of neurological conditions, behaviors, and characteristics. It's also not just referring to people with a diagnosis, but also those people without diagnosis. Okay, now I'm going to make a long list of many different terms addressed by Boston University, and I will try to give a short description of each. Some of these are fairly unknown or poorly understood in common society, so I may address some of them with far more detail in later posts. My hope is that this will provide a broader grasp on the many kinds of challenges, advantages, and realities that encompass neurodiversity and neurodivergent individuals. Though some of these terms may be problematic, they are included for two reasons. One, in cases where such terms are still used by society to describe differently abled people or issues surrounding them. For example, some people still use the word disability. That term is in this list. I will cover it, but it's a term that I usually don't use anymore because I think differently abled is more appropriate. And two, in cases where some people choose to actually use certain terminology for themselves, but it hasn't necessarily been decided if and when those terms are problematic or preferred. So if you hear somebody say that something is offensive, say that you shouldn't say it, and you are not specifically talking about you and your own identity, you probably shouldn't be saying it. So for example, there will be some times where a certain group may actually use a word that some people say is offensive to describe themselves, to describe their group, and they may be okay with that personally, for themselves and for their group. That doesn't mean that other people outside of that group should use those terms, but it means that those people within the group have decided to use them. Sometimes they are trying to take back those words that have become offensive, that have been used to discriminate and stigmatize against them. They know people still use them. They're trying to make them more positive. And sometimes they feel those words are an important part of them. But if you don't belong within that group, that's not up to you to decide what is offensive to them. I don't know if you understand that, but I hear this argument come up so often that, oh, well, this is a bad word and nobody's supposed to use it, so why are you using it when you're in that group? Because within that group, they are allowed to. They have made their own decision that for them, that this is something that identifies them, and this is something that they want to be positive for them. If you're not in that group, it's not about you. It's about them. And you let them make their own decisions. Because as I said before, everyone's identity is their own personal choice. Your identity is your choice. Their identity is theirs. And the terms that they choose to use to describe their identity is up to them. And yes, there will be times that those terms will be offensive to somebody within their group. And that is for them to try to figure out and them to decide, has this become too toxic? Is this something that we shouldn't be doing anymore? But you on the outside of that group, it's really not for you to say. It's really not your decision. I'll give you one example. I try not to call my brother autistic anymore. I say he has autism because he is so much more than that one diagnosis. And because he himself has been so harmed and stigmatized by people that don't understand autism and that treat him badly because he has autism. But at the same time, he identifies more as a person with autism than he does anything else. So there are some people who feel that their autism is so important to them, that it is such a very important part of who they are as a person, that they choose to identify themselves as autistic. Instead of saying, I have autism, they might say that I am autistic. And that is their choice. If you're not sure, ask them. Should I say that you have autism? Should I say that you are autistic? You could even ask them how they feel about use of that term, so that you can better get to know their perspective on them. But either way, their autonomy and their choice of identity should prevail, as those self-identifying terms are their choice and no one else's. So let's start with this list of terms. It's fairly long. I've got this very full bookcase full of stuff. So we're going to sift through it, find out what these terms are and what they mean, at least according to the articles that I've looked at. Ability. Current competence or skill to perform an act. Ableism, a tendency to judge and stereotype those who are differently abled, often called disabled, but I think differently abled is actually more accurate. Holistic, a person who is not on the autism spectrum. Please understand that when a term is used to describe somebody that is not atypical, that doesn't mean they're trying to insult you. They are just using a term that specifically describes them as not within that atypical group. So a person that is holistic is not autistic. Lowercase deaf and uppercase deaf. Lowercase term deaf is an audiological condition of not hearing or not hearing well enough or having a severe hearing deficit. The capitalized term deaf is used when describing particular groups of deaf people who share a language, culture, etc., dealing with being deaf, like American Sign Language. The group for American Sign Language might have a capital D for deaf. Disability includes physical, mental, intellectual, and sensory impairments, which can hinder a person's full and effective participation in society as equally as others. Okay, so in this case, it's not really about the disability itself. It's about whether that characteristic, trait, or ability actually contributes to impairments and hindrances within the environment. So if an environment is not suited to them, they won't be able to fully and effectively participate within that society as well as everyone else. Down syndrome. These are individuals that are born with a specific set of extra chromosomes, which contribute to things like physical and mental developmental issues. Learning disability alters the brain functioning in a way that affects one or more cognitive processes related to learning. Mental health disability, impairment of emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Non-visible disability, any hidden impairment that goes unnoticed. It's just not obvious. Somebody may look at you and think that you are typical, and that is not always true. You can't always tell. You can't always see it. They don't always act the same way that other people in society think that a person like that would act. It's not something that you can easily just look at a person and see. You don't necessarily know that they're differently able. Now, these terms are categorized into supports. Okay, the first term for supports is accessibility. Accessibility, the ability to access functionality of a system or an entity and gain the benefits either assisted or unassisted. It's probably better if the person can get those same benefits unassisted, but sometimes they have to use assistance. Accommodation, a modification or adjustment that enables a differently abled person to perform and succeed to the same extent as a typically abled person. For example, you might take a textbook that can't be read by a person who has trouble seeing, but make an audio form of it where they can hear it, so they can get the same information from it. It would just be in a different format. Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was created with the intention of guaranteeing that people with disabilities have the same opportunities at mainstream American life as everyone else. Assistive technology. This is any item, device, equipment, or system that is used to improve functional capabilities of differently abled individuals. Person-first language versus identity-first language. Person-first language describes what a person has, a person with autism. That person has autism. Versus identity-first language. This identifies the person as the condition. They are autistic. I am autistic. That's what this is about. This is about whether to use person-first language, where you're describing them as a person with that issue. That issue is not them, but it is part of them. Versus identity-first language, where you are actually describing them as that particular thing. Universal design. These are quality designs that are created to make an accessible environment that is understood and usable for all, regardless of their differences and similarities. Creating with these universal design ideas in mind helps to bring a universal design. This category is for spectrums, as these are on broad spectrums. The severity, characteristics, and symptoms are different in each person. So every person that is on one of these spectrums is different. They're not going to necessarily be the same. They're not going to necessarily have the same kind of traits, symptoms, gifts, deficits, interests. It's a very broad spectrum. That is why they are called spectrums. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, sometimes called ADD, sometimes called ADHD, can present with difficulty focusing, with hyperfocusing, with easy distraction, being overactive, being inattentive, or being impulsive. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, condition that can involve challenges in areas like social interaction, like speech and nonverbal communication, restricted and repetitive behaviors. This next category is for processing issues. These conditions can involve processing impairments, difficulties, and differences. Dyscalculia. This is a condition of impairment in areas like math, with patterns and numbers. It can be processing the math problem itself. It can be processing how those numbers look on the page. It can be processing getting those numbers onto the page. And many of these processing issues are that way. It can be a problem from processing what is on the page. It can be a problem from processing the problem itself. It can be a problem processing what you have in your head and getting it onto the page. Dysgraphia. This is a condition or impairment with writing. It can include difficulties with spelling, with grammar, with alignment, with spacing, with punctuation, and with handwriting. Dyslexia. This is a condition of impairment connecting the letters and words on a page with the sounds and words that they make and putting it all together. Dyspraxia, also sometimes called developmental coordination disorder. This affects fine and gross motor coordination. So dyscalculia is focused in math and numbers. Dysgraphia is focused on letters and writing. Dyslexia is focused on reading. And dyspraxia is focused on movement. Now I'm also going to include some more terms which are listed on the Diversity for Social Impact website, because neurodiversity includes so much more than many people realize, myself included. It involves gifts, strengths, challenges, and impairments. I will continue this list with more terms dealing with processing and go from there. I do realize there is some overlap, like some processing issues also fall under senses and vice versa. But I tried to categorize them just to make it a little more orderly, because before it was just one long jumbled up mess of terms. So just putting it in these categories just helps me to keep it a little bit more organized. Giftedness. This is where you exhibit capabilities beyond average people. But keep in mind that those gifts can also come with challenges. Just because a person is gifted doesn't mean that everything they do is smart. It doesn't mean they're gifted in every area. They may be gifted in one area, they may be gifted in more than one area, but no matter what they're gifted in, that can come with challenges. For example, finding people that you identify with, that you can talk to, who will actually understand what you're saying. Hyperlexia. This is the ability to read at a surprisingly early age. It sometimes comes with it having an obsession with letters. Auditory processing disorder. This is a condition where there is a gap between what one hears and what the brain processes. So your ears may hear it one way, but your brain might process it another way. Erline syndrome. This is a condition where there's a gap between what one sees and what the brain processes. So while your eyes might process it a certain way, your brain might process it differently. And it can also involve oversensitivity. Now we're to the category of senses. This is your sense of smell, your sense of touch, your sense of taste, your sense of sound, sense of emotion, all your senses. Synesthesia, these are sensations that are experienced with other senses. So it's almost like the sensations are mixed up, like smelling music or hearing shapes, tasting aggression or feeling a flavor. Sensory integration disorder. This is where the brain doesn't respond correctly to stimulus, so it sends incorrect signals to the body. Next category is nerve and motor issues. Tic disorders and Tourette's. Tic disorders involve motor or verbal tics. It can come in the form of sounds, twitches, actions, or jerks that are chronic. Tourette's is a type of tic disorder that involves both verbal and motor tics. Seizures. These are due to abnormal electrical activity in the brain. Cerebral palsy. This is a condition where abnormal brain development can lead to difficulty in muscle movement, posture, mobility, and balance. Apraxia, a condition where the person cannot move as desired. It affects brain and muscle coordination, causing a failure to perform the desired movements. Parkinson's disease is a degenerative disease where damaged cells in the brain result in its impaired function and ability to control movement and motor skills. Multiple sclerosis. Damage to the nerve fiber causes signal problems from the brain to the muscles, contributing to numbness, tremors, tingling sensations to the muscles and some parts of the body. Agenesis or dysgenesis of the corpus callosum. This is where nerve fibers in the brain that are so crucial for our functioning do not form, or they become malformed later on. And the last category of terms, mental health. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. These are people who are driven to compulsive behaviors. It can be due to stress or tension from one or more obsessions. Anxiety, a chronic feeling of fear, of worry, general unease, with symptoms like sleeplessness, heart palpitations, feelings of dread. Some who do not realize they're having anxiety can mistake this for heart problems or heart attack. Depression, a chronic feeling of sadness for an extended period, usually for no apparent reason. Although we need to remember that it is not always sadness. This isn't about having the blues. Sometimes it involves feelings of loneliness, of emptiness, of not caring. It is not just a brief period of sadness. These are chronic feelings. They go on, they're repeated, can last for extended periods of time. They can happen over and over again. Bipolar disorder. In this condition, people may have highs or lows of mood or energy. Trauma, severe emotional or psychological response to unfortunate or cataclysmic events, such as death, accident, threats to life or well-being, abuse, assault, loss of loved ones, disasters such as natural disasters and wars, fetal alcohol syndrome. This occurs from alcohol exposure during pregnancy. It can contribute to adverse physical and mental development in infants that can last throughout their lifetime. All right, we have finally reached the end of our list of terminology. I know it was long, but thank you for hanging in if you are still listening. To finish this post off, let's cover some ideas to be more supportive of our neurodivergent community, members, friends, and family. An article from Cleveland Clinic advises us to listen in whatever way they communicate. Let them know that you hear them, understand them, and respect their choices. Autonomy is very important, whether they are neurodivergent, differently abled, or typical. Autonomy is important to each and every individual. Find ways to communicate that work for them. That could be talking, texting, video, audio, signing, art, singing, poems, math, science, email, face-to-face, with a device in their language or any other way they choose. There are so many ways to communicate, and all are valid. Beware of words that are devaluing. Frankly, you should probably be a little wary of words that are valuing as well. People need to be praised, but being praised for doing things that a person is perfectly capable of can also feel devaluing. I think of when I work around the yard or house and someone makes a big deal out of it because I'm a female. That kind of praise can feel kind of yucky. It's patronizing. We all deserve praise, but for things like doing something better than we've done it before, or doing something that we always had trouble with before, doing something that we can do now that we weren't able to do before, excelling at something. Those are things that we should be praised for, and regularly. Every neurodivergent person is different, same as each person is different. We are all our own individual person in a very diverse world, which brings me to the next bit of advice. Try not to make assumptions without getting to know the person first. This goes for capabilities and challenges, things pertaining to various identities and anything else. Don't assume. Some of the assumptions are completely untrue, and some can become self-fulfilling prophecy. Finally, treat everyone with respect in a way that is respectful of their strengths and their challenges. This has gotten pretty long, so I am cutting it here. When I do future videos, I may go over some of this a little bit more, and I may include some of my family's own experiences. In the weeks to come, you can wait for future posts on other parts of neurodiversity, ways of using new and old language or terms, support around the community, work, health, and school, various outlooks on support and treatment. And that is all I have for you this week. I am sorry it was so long. I hope to see you next week when we talk about executive function and executive dysfunction. See you then.
Until next time, I'll see you when I see you. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you want more content, click subscribe. If you click that little bell and click all, then you'll get more content notifications.